You're watching Notepad. I'm your host, Ibrahim Sani. We're doing this interview in Permata Sapura, the latest building in the KLCC Business District. And we want to talk about how Malaysia is moving from a pandemic situation to an endemic one, or an endemicity scenario. As typical with all the other realms of getting back together, not just in the business world, but also personal finance, the topic or conversation moving forward is on what kind of diversification can we do when it comes to investing, but at the same time, how can businesses raise funds, not just safely and in a regulated way, but more efficiently and most importantly in a way that is going to be beneficial for the business outright. What better way to talk about or to debate about the item rather than equity crowdfunding or peer-to-peer lending? ECF and P2P is not new, not just in Malaysia but around the world. But of course, ECF is only gaining traction here in the country. I have in the studio joining me is Ethis Malaysia, the Shariah-compliant Securities Commission regulated P2P platform. And the reason why we got them here in the studio is because very recently Baloi, an e-commerce platform made for grocery shopping with an online to offline and consumer to market model, or O2O or C2M model, has raised more than 6 million ringgit in one of the largest equity crowdfunding campaigns in Malaysia. So we're trying to understand a little bit better about the popularity of ECF and whether or not this is gaining ground or traction, or is this a one-off thing? So what better item to talk about this than my conversation right now with Wan Dazriq Wan Zulkiflee of Ethis Malaysia. So Wan, let's talk a little bit more about Baloi. How did it come about? How did the campaign take off on a bright start, and what makes this campaign a little bit different from the others?
I think it's interesting. Baloi, for Ethis specifically, is one of the biggest up to date so far on the crowdfunding platform that managed to raise to 6 million ringgit. I think if you're aware, I think in Malaysia there's about 10 recognized market operator that can do equity crowdfunding, and we are one of them. And our unique value proposition, aside from being an equity crowdfunding platform, is actually we are only one yang recognized under the Securities Commission of Malaysia that is Shariah-compliant. So with regards to Baloi, I think another value proposition yang different from us with other 9 is actually a lot of our retail investors base are based abroad, namely in Singapore, a lot of them in Middle East, the MENA, and also UK and US. Yeah. So for Baloi specifically, we don't just tap the retail investors in Malaysia, but what actually happened, out of that 6 million, we actually managed to get investors from 20 different countries.
For that 6 million ringgit
for
campaign?
that 6 million ringgit. So
okay, if you think about it, right? So a lot of Malaysian businesses is always about how do you attract foreign investors to come in?
Yeah.
And they always think about pre-seed and then maybe seed, and then maybe secure 2 or 3 VCs. Yeah. And not many people want to think about ECF because they think it's a hassle, tedious. What's the point of getting 30 investors all putting in 100k each? Yeah. Let me talk to 2 or 3 VCs. Yeah. Must that thinking change, I suppose?
I think so. It is a form of re-education to some extent. Fintech or crowdfunding is a form of alternative financing in Malaysia. I think it's getting traction. If you follow the Securities Commission's report, yesterday, in fact, SC, the chairman of SC mentioned that ECF for quarter 1 2021, comparing to quarter 1 2020, the take-up was 151%. And this is during the pandemic times where people can't go out and stuff like that. And businesses are finding hard to get financing, conventional financing, whereby if they go to banks, sometimes they need to have collaterals to get, supports or loans and stuff like that. So for fintech or crowdfunding or ECF, it's almost seen as alternative financing, particularly for the MSMEs, the micro, small, medium enterprises, whereby they want to get investments or scale, funding to scale. But maybe they don't have collateral so much, so they look into crowdfunding to do that. So I think that's a different way of looking for financing, particularly if you're a small, medium enterprises.
So what's the next step for you guys? Are you guys struggling to find businesses that want to come on and be part of the platform? Is that part of the challenge that you have to overcome?
Yeah, I think, in all honesty, our hashtag, so to speak, our mantra is actually to circulate good. Whereby when we say, we try to shift, we're a disruptor, we're a startup, we're fintech for sure. One being, we know, there's a lot of people in Malaysia who can't get access to bankings. And this is what I call the unbankables, the underserved, for example. I think fintech or crowdfunding are able to bridge that gap. You rightfully mentioned, Ibrahim, I think a lot of our projects still are actually in the areas of Klang Valley. But I also have a inclination to say a lot of businesses in Kelantan, Johor, Sabah and Sarawak, for example, who might not have that access to finance, we need to reach out to them.
So how do you intend to do that? Because it's always that strange realm of, you guys are in fintech, everything you guys are supposed to do belongs here on the computer, but then you have to go on the ground, have some activation team of sorts, and try to reach out to people on the ground. It's like, I mean, can you imagine Facebook going on the ground or Twitter going on the ground? It just doesn't work that way. So do you have to just come to terms with the fact that while you're a fintech, you still need to have some sort of on-the-ground people to make it work?
Yes, it's like I say, it's not just Ethis alone, it's not just the recognized market operators' effort alone. To be honest with you, it's an ecosystem play. I think, in Malaysia, you've heard a lot of initiatives, whether it's through security commissions on CMP3, the Capital Market Plan 3. In fact, just recently of the 12th Malaysian Plan, who also specifically mentioned about crowdfunding to be a catalytic means to drive Bumi Putra entrepreneurs in Malaysia. And obviously the up and coming budget 2022, which focuses around the fintech or alternative financing, specifically in the halal industry, for example, right? And security commissions, alhamdulillah, so far has been quite supportive. So they are aware of this fact, like what you mentioned, access to infrastructure is a barrier, digital infrastructure, for example, especially in the east part of Malaysia. So there need to be an activation of roadshows, awareness, and this is not just Ethis alone, it's not just security commissions alone, but all ecosystem players and industry players in the fintech space, not just crowdfunding space. So there'll be a lot of roadshows coming up to different states of Malaysia, I think all 14 states of Malaysia. Ethis specifically, we support that and advocate on two fronts. One is actually the equity crowdfunding space, but secondly also in the Islamic digital economy space. There's other peers who are doing P2P and stuff like that as well, who are actually part of that, call it initiatives to reach out to greater Malaysia, to educate around the alternative financing through digital platforms.
All right, we'll go for one short break before we continue on with Ethis Malaysia. Thanks for staying on with us. I have with me Wan Dazriq, the CEO of Ethis Malaysia, joining us at our studio in Permata Sapura. So, Wan, let's talk about Ethis per se. This is a very tough business to be in, more so in Malaysia, because you're right, there's 10 players recognized, and then of course I don't know how many unrecognized, and good luck to the investors if they get on that platform. But generally speaking, why ECF? Why equity crowdfunding?
Like I said, equity crowdfunding to us is a means to bridge that ambition of circulate good. In all honesty, Ethis is a group of companies. We actually started in Indonesia back about 2018, 2019. In fact, we only got a full license to do P2P crowdfunding in Indonesia quite recently, full license. And alhamdulillah, so far the traction there has been quite good, because I think the mass is a bit more different than Malaysia. We also have a sister brand company called Global Sedekah, who does specifically charity crowdfunding. And this is also very lucrative in the sense of when we go through pandemic, there's a lot of MSMEs who are doing food bank, for example. A lot of government organizations, NGOs who are looking to seek fund to do their community initiatives. So for Ethis, you're right, in the equity crowdfunding space, we see that as a means to circulate good, to bridge financing to the unbankables, for example. But our ethos, to be honest with you, is riding on the Islamic finance. To us, regardless whether it's P2P, charity or ECF, we feel that Islamic finance, and if you're a bit sophisticated, you see the basis or underlying concept of Islamic finance. It's no different of how people say SDGs, for example.
Yeah.
Because all Islamic finance is really about promoting the concept of just and fair. When we speak about adil, justice, when we speak about ihsan, being excellence in doing transactions, and also the inclusivity portion, which is pretty much what SDG does. And to go to the market, when we speak about the Islamic digital economy per se, you're probably aware Malaysia has been a forefront in the Islamic fintech space. In fact, the recent Global Islamic Fintech Report 2021, we are actually the first country that scores the highest. Second to that is actually the Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of potential in Malaysia that I feel is still untapped, the ecosystem-wise.
I think a lot of people think that not only is ECF not a viable way to move forward, but are probably now thinking about it because of some of the success stories, right? Anywhere from Baloi to all the other stuff that we've seen so far. And apart from Ethis, other platforms, they have raised millions, sometimes tens of millions, right? But the issue here is when people think about Islamic Fintech, they don't know whether their business can be deemed as Sharia compliant enough for them to come on the platform. Baloi is straightforward. They are selling groceries, O2O, and it should be as simple as that. But sometimes it gets hazy. So for these kind of companies, how do you think they can resolve their own issues and try to see the benefits of Islamic Fintech, but at the same time, manage their own grey area of being Sharia compliant themselves?
Yeah, I think there's a need to do a bit of a re-education. I think there's a lot of stigma when we speak about Islamic Fintech or Islamic finance.
Semua kena pakai kopiah.
And right, and I think there's this thing about halal and haram and stuff like that, right? And not to undermine that there is that portion, but I think like I mentioned earlier, is the concept of being just and fair, equitable and fair. So for businesses, I think a lot of businesses now are reframing in terms of when they say Sharia, it's not a cost, but rather it's an investment for the long run. Why I say that, for example, in Islamic finance, we don't condone the concept of interest or riba, right? Because when we say riba or interest, there's an element of ambiguity or uncertainties. So what Islamic finance does, in fact, for our investors also, there's a concept where we say there must be a targeted aim for both issuers and investors are okay to do commercial transactions on. Meaning to say you manage that expectation up front. So there's no ambiguity happens in that transactions.
Yeah, the gharar element. But the question now is this is a problem. When you remove the ambiguity and you set the expectation up front, that's where most of the deals, I wouldn't say fail, but not go through, right?
Yeah, it
not
takes
pass.
Yeah, no, it takes two. For example, so Baloi, for example, I think there's an element of obviously all businesses have an element of buy now pay later. Right. When we say that, I think a lot of people will say, oh, actually that is actually there's an interest involved in that, and that's an element of not condoned by Islam. Right. But it's not to say it's all doom and gloom, because there's actually a concept of istijra, whereby you can still do buy now pay later, but at a targeted pricing, for example. Preference shares, right? Conventional, preference shares, they make money out of preference shares. When we do ECF, to some extent, we can't do preference shares, but there's an alternative to do class shares, for example. So I think
everything is set at predetermined date. Set price, set everything upfront.
And I think
again, gharar removal.
Yes, and I think that works both for the investors and the issuer, in this case businesses, right? Because businesses, especially during the
issuers, okay.
So when businesses, when the economic goes down, for example, they need to still meet the obligations to the issuers, right? But where Islamic finance focuses on is actually the sharing between risk and rewards for both issuers and investors. Issuers is the business owners lah. So in the point of time, so let's just say 1-2 months ago, some businesses are not doing quite well, right? So servicing their financing to some extent can be minimized because of the expectations that are set upfront between investors and issuers. So I think a lot of businesses who actually try to go on Islamic finance. In fact, banks are doing this. There's a lot of Islamic banks arms who are a bit more prudent in terms of how do they do transactions, just to make sure that there's no element of, like you mentioned, gharar and ambiguity and stuff like that. So I think it's a promising space to be in. And
it is.
Yeah.
Particularly more so now because it's like I feel that there's a reborn movement right now. People are getting back on their feet. There were a lot of pain, suffering, quite literally to many of us. But at the same time, okay, most of us are vaccinated, economy is picking up, budget 2022 is around, and let's just get on with it, right? That's the mood. Okay, we'll go for one short break. When we come back, we'll discuss a little bit more about the investor side, not the issuer side. Okay. We'll be right back after these messages. Hey, thanks for staying on with us. We have here in the studio with me at Sapura Resources or Permata Sapura here at KLCC Business District, Wan Dazriq, the CEO of Ethis Malaysia. So let's talk about diversifying a possibility of an investment portfolio for investors. So, we are all familiar with the various asset classes that we have right now. Why should investors think about ECF?
I think a main answer to that, I think ECF is considered as an alternative financing. Not just alternative financing, but it's also overriding a lot on the digitalization ways of doing things. So that's one. But secondly also, with regards to risk and rewards, I think in Malaysia there's three types of investors, so to speak. One being what we call the retail investors. People like you and I who just want to invest in a couple of thousands just to try it out and see what makes sense. The second type of investor is the angel investors, a bit more sophisticated. They can actually invest in millions of ringgit, but they also get certain incentives. And the third portion is actually what we call sophisticated, the PEs and VCs of the startups. In fact, to some extent, the institutional banking, right? When we speak about retail investors, we call it the crowd investors. One is actually that diversification of portfolio, but secondly is actually it gives you a bit of not to say hedging, but opportunity to test out markets through investment in the players. I'll quote one, right? We speak about halal industry, right? It was mentioned, in Malaysia, by the year 2025, the net worth of export of halal products or halal industry is around RM52 or RM56 billion ringgit, right? So that's about 2, 3, or 4 years from now, right? So if you want to invest, right, people might think, oh, okay, maybe I could invest in the halal market because there's a lot of prospects there. Or in the digital economy or Islamic digital economy. I could share also MDAC. No, sorry, I trace back a bit. In 2016, the Islamic digital economy actually contributes 18.2% to the Malaysian GDP, right? What MDAC have said in 2022 or 2023, it is forecasted the Islamic digital economy would contribute about 22%.
Sorry, Islamic digital economy. And then the bigger digital economy?
It's probably slightly more bigger out of that pie. But having said that, Islamic capital markets is actually the major proportion of the capital markets of Malaysia, so to speak.
But that, not so much the equity part.
Correct. So there's element of sukuk, P2P and stuff like that, right? So here's the landscape now, right? In fintech company, right? Fintech players in Malaysia. There's about 233 fintech companies in Malaysia.
Oh, sorry, what?
233. Yeah. So they're ranging from property.
So there's a lot, isn't it?
There's a lot, right?
Good. They're selling whatever, and then I'm now a fintech company. I have a website. Is that it?
So that's the thing, right? I'll give you another flip of that, right? So the Islamic digital economy or Islamic fintech company, there's only 11 in that, which is about 4% out of that 233.
Okay.
If you're a crowd investor, right? If you connect the dots with the market trends, retail, when the crowd is retail, you might say, I might want to try to invest in some of these Islamic fintech companies or halal companies. They might be small for now, but 3 or 4 years later, they are bound to go bigger, right? If you're a retail investor, maybe you maybe invest not in millions, but in some couple of thousands, for example, right? Yeah. That gives you what you mentioned, the diversified portfolio for you to test out now, but maybe reap the benefits in 3 or 4 years down the line. So that's probably a different mindset of like layman people, you and I, who wants to do investment.
At the risk of sounding very silly, but I'm just going to ask this question, don't laugh at me. Do you think that insti investors can start to think about ECF as an opportunity for them to diversify their portfolio? Is that a silly question?
No, it's not. It's not. Honestly, I couldn't share who, but some of the banking industries
siapa?
Cannot share. But there's a lot of conversations, to be honest, whereby they try to mix or hybridize debt and equity as part of investment.
So this would fall under DCM team there, or what?
Depends on which departments or organizations you're from. So this is not just for banking. Some of PEs and VCs also are looking to that.
I was thinking the same thing. Yeah. But they are starting to think to diversify. But wouldn't it be a headache because they got to manage? I mean, money is not a problem.
Yeah,
money is always a problem for somebody, right? But generally speaking, they want to set aside, I don't know, 50 million, and then you split it down to that tranches of 100,000, 200,000. Then you have a lot of companies to manage, don't you think?
No. So another mind frame to that is actually if you have a single company, for example, right? Okay. Upcoming unicorn, for example, right? You want to invest in millions and billions, for example. Why you might want to consider to do crowdfunding is actually because the portion of crowdfunding is probably small in the larger scale of things, but people sometimes don't see when you speak about crowdfunding, there's amount of validation to the products or services from the market, which is the crowd. Now, a lot of bigger institutions, while the tickets to crowdfunding and what they do is, it's almost like langit dengan bumi kan. But sometimes they do appreciate that bumi focus because it gives them a bit of comfort and say, oh, actually, the demand is there, right?
Not to mention the adjusted risk basis is quite well diversified, a bit too well diversified if you ask me.
True, but I mean it might give a certain level of headache, in terms of valuation, for example, how much the company value at this point, if there's a investors wants to come in, right?
I can imagine my viewers right now shouting at the screen, asking what's the interest rate like, or profit rate or return rate like. What's the range we're looking at?
The straight cut answer to that, usually the issuer, which is the business, would actually dictate. We can recommend, but mostly you'll be ranging between 9 to 15 on average. A lot of companies are doing that. Depends on what level of maturity you are. Startups generally probably give a bit more, arguably smaller or mid-size because their valuation is slightly lower.
So what's the tenure like?
Depends. So sometimes you can redeem, not to say redeem, you can look into profitability within a year with a time frame of between 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, that's more reasonable, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we're looking at 9 to 15% over the per annum.
Yeah. But this is in the equity crowdfunding play.
Yes. Yeah. In the equity crowdfunding play, 9 to, I mean, of course, everything, the variables vary widely, I understand. 9 to 15 over a 5-year horizon for a startup, for instance. With that, of course, the notion of that risk going on. That's fantastic.
Yeah, but there's also, I call it SMEs who might want to raise up to 10 million ringgit. But it's almost like a pre-IPO strategy.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, so that you get a higher valuation.
So the issue, how much do they dish out for the equity crowdfunding portion normally?
Depends. So
I'm not saying Balo, I'm saying just normally.
Yeah, right? So it depends. It range around the same range, but that also depends on their confidence level and also the investors' appetite and also the market trends. So in the case of Baloi, like you mentioned, right? So O2O is something coming up, and also compounding by the F&B punya industries who are trajecting at a good yielding in years to come.
Fantastic. There's so many things to talk about, but unfortunately we have to draw this conversation to a close for the time being. I'm sure I'm going to be speaking to you again very, very soon. But that was Wan Dazriq Wan Zulkiflee of Ethis Malaysia. If you've missed any part of this interview, just head on to astroawani.com, look for Notepad over there. Until then, we are shot on location at Permata Sapura. My name is Ibrahim Sani. Catch you in the next one.